Okay, so we're given a figure, and the two objects are being pulled by a force f of x to the right as given. So the magnitude of the force is 14 newtons, which acts on the object of mass 2 or on the 8 kilogram mass. And then if the coefficient of friction on all surfaces is zero point 0.1, what is the acceleration of each block on the tension on the string? And the tension, tama ba ako? Ayan. And the tension on the string. So we are to find the acceleration of the blocks, okay, of each block, and the tension on the string. Okay, class. So let's imagine if mass 1 and mass 2 are being connected by a string or a cord, ayan, which is not stretchable. Okay, and 8 kilogram is being dragged by 40 newtons to the right. So where will the objects move, or saan mag-accelerate yung objects? Okay, so if you will imagine that, so if this is being pulled to the right, so therefore, mass 1 will be accelerating to this direction. Okay, at the same time, if if this is connected to 8 kilograms, kung ito ay pupunta sa kanan, so ito naman ay mag-move pataas. So, mag-accelerate naman ito pataas. Okay, so those two are the directions of our objects, assuming that force Fx is going to the right. Ayan. So, ano ba yung first step natin? First step natin lagi is mag-drawing ng FBD para mas madali yung analysis natin. And before we can draw that, we need to identify first all the forces acting on each object. All the forces. So you need to not miss one or else the analysis will be wrong. So kailangan ma-identify natin lahat ng forces acting on. Okay, so let's start with the first mass. So what are the forces acting on the mass 1? So we have the weight. Okay, let's call that weight 1. And then ano pa? Okay, so since meron tayong tally dito, so it's a string. And the direction of the tension is always away from the object. So if the object is 2 kilograms or mass 1, so therefore, the tension should be away from it, not towards it. It's away from it. Since the object 1 is not on a surface, so therefore there's no friction involved, or there's no normal force. If there's no normal force, so therefore there is no friction existing. Okay. So that means for mass 1, we only have two forces acting on it. We have the weight and the tension. For mass 2, what are the forces acting on it? It also has the weight. And since it's on the surface, so meron siyang normal force acting on it. And then we have the applied force, f of x. And then we also have the cord here. So therefore, we have the tension here. And since meron tayong coefficient of friction, so that means there's friction acting on it. So question I, what is the direction of the frictional force? Okay, so remember the direction of the frictional force is always away from the opposite the motion. If the motion of 8 kilograms will be to the right due to this force, so therefore friction should be opposite it. So it should be to the left. Okay, so that's a frictional force. Okay. So after that, we will draw the FPD. So FPD natin ay object per object. So let's have this the mass 1. So what are the forces acting on mass 1? So we have the tension, and then we have the weight 1. Ayan. So don't forget the acceleration. Acceleration is in this direction. Meron pa, wala na. So I have 1, 2, 1, 2, and then we have the acceleration. Okay, so then we can proceed to the second law. And since the only forces acting on it is along y, so we only have the component of the force along y. So that's the summation of forces along y is equal to MAY. So lahat ng pataas will be considered positive. Ayan. So ano yung pataas? So pataas natin isa lang, that's tension, minus yung weight 1. So weight 1. Ayan. So that's equal to yung mass 1 natin times yung positive A. Ayan. Positive A. Because it's upward upward, so we're assuming it's positive. So this is tension minus 2 times 9.8, that's equal to 2A. So that's 2 minus 19.6 is equal to 2A. So this will be our first equation. Ayan. So let that be our first equation. A question? How we arrive to that equation? Okay, wala. Okay, now let's proceed to the second mass. Ayan. Teka lang. Yeah. So hirap pala nito. Ayan. So let's identify all the forces. So the applied force is to the right. So nandito yung applied force, f of x. Normal is pataas. So nandito yung normal, 1. Weight is pababa. So weight 2. Frictional force is to the left. At the same time yung ating tension. So tension is also to the left. Ayan. Okay? And then don't forget the acceleration, it's to the right. Also, that's also positive. Yan. Okay. Now, let's proceed with the... Okay, class. So, pag ganito yung given natin, meron tayong normal and then tatandaan nyo lagi, pag merong frictional force na kasama sa analysis, unang-una nyo laging kukunin is yung normal force. Okay? So, lagi nyo kukunin, una, yung normal force kung merong frictional force. Minsan kasi given na agad yung frictional force, so let's say, in-identify natin that the total frictional force is, let's say, 10 newtons. So hindi na kailangan ko din yung normal to get the frictional force because it is already given. Pero kung hindi siya given at ang given lang ay yung coefficient of friction, ang una nyo laging kukunin is yung normal. Okay, napaka-importante nun. Kasi the only way to connect yung forces along X and forces along Y is through frictional force because friction is mu N. Tama ba? Mu N. And then yung N ay kinukuha siya doon sa Y wherein frictional force is nasa X. Kaya kailangan, pag merong ganitong klaseng example or problem, una yung kukunin is yung normal force. At nasang component yung normal force? Okay, nasa Y-axis siya. So doon na natin siya unang kukunin. So summation of forces along Y is equal to MAY, pataas ay positive. Kaya lang ang question ay, is there an acceleration along Y? So if we will check, ang acceleration lang natin is along X. So therefore, acceleration along Y is 0. So that means the summation of forces along Y is 0 because it is not accelerating along Y. It's only along X. Okay, so let's add. So we only have normal 1 minus weight 2 is equal to 0. So normal 1 is equal to weight 2. So normal 1 is, what's our second weight? So that's mass pala, 8 times 9.8. So normal 1 is equal to 78.4 newtons. Ayan. Pag nakuha na natin yan, so we can proceed to X. So summation of forces along X is equal to MAX. Pakanan ay positive. Ayan. So here are the forces along X. So you can see. So these are the forces along X. So we only have F of X minus friction minus tension is equal to mass 2 times positive A. Okay, F of X is given that's 14 newtons minus, okay, frictional force natin is mu N minus tension is equal to 8A. Yes, so that's 40 minus 0.1 times 78.4 minus C is equal to 8. So let's simplify. That's 40 minus 0.1. So let's continue. May question ba before we continue? So I have the second equation here. Now let's go back to the first equation. Ayan. So that means we can solve now simultaneously. So i-align ko na lang para madali natin siyang i-solve. So we'll have negative 19.6 plus t is equal to 2a. So this is from our first equation. So what we do is we can cancel. So we just add the two equations by the way. And then so we'll have 12.56 is equal to 10a. So a is equal to 1.256 meters per second square. Ayan. So that's our acceleration. Okay, so the acceleration of the two objects is 1.256. If you will consider the direction, for mass 1, it's upward, and then for mass 2, it is to the left, to the right. Okay. Okay, question about the acceleration? Parang kubit yung, no, not sure what's happening. So anyway, okay, so let's continue. Next is yung tension. So, saan ko nakukunin yung tension? So, let's just get at equation 1. So, at 1, T minus 19.6 is equal to 2 times 1.256. So, what is the tension? Okay, so tension is 22.112 newtons. Okay, 22. Okay, so any question on our first example? Okay, wala. Okay, so let's proceed to our second example. Talaga ito mapantay. Ayan. Okay. So a 3-kilogram block starts from rest at the top of a 30-degree incline and slides a distance of 2 meters down the incline in 1.5 seconds. Okay, so let's try to draw that figure first. So I have the, yeah, so let's say that this is the inclined plane. So this is 30 degrees. And let's say that this is the block. And the block will travel 2 meters. And then makaka-travel siya ng 2 meters in 1.5 seconds. Ayan. So 1.5 seconds. Okay? Yun lang. Okay, first question. Find the magnitude of the acceleration of the block. Can we get that na? Hindi, mamaya na lang natin kunin. And B, the coefficient of kinetic friction. So letter A, What's the acceleration? B, the coefficient of kinetic friction. C, the frictional force. And D, the speed of the block as it slid after it has slid 2 meters. So what's the final velocity? The final speed or the last speed after traveling 1.5 seconds or 2 meters. Okay, class, the method is still the same. It's the same. And so what we need to do is also to identify all the forces acting on the object. Okay. So what are the forces acting on the object? So we have the weight, which is downward. Okay, normal is always perpendicular to the surface. And the magnitude of, and then, since meron tayong friction, so meron tayong frictional force. And if we will consider the motion of the object, so that means the object will move down the incline. So acceleration natin is directed down the incline. Okay? And since frictional force is always opposite the motion, so therefore frictional force should be opposite it, which is up the incline. Okay? Since wala naman tali na nakalagay, so wala tayong tension, wala naman ding applied force, so ganyan lang siya. Okay? Now, let's draw the FBD. So, yung FBD natin, ayan class. So, sa FBD, I think you had this before, that you are to rotate axis. So, we are to rotate axis. Yung X and Y plane, i-rotate natin. Just that, one of the axis is parallel to the surface. So, normally, ang ginagawa nating parallel sa surface is yung x-axis. So, para magdodrawing tayo ng bagong x and y plane na nakaparallel yung x-axis sa ating surface. Ayan. So, ito yung bagong x, tapos ito yung bagong y-axis. Okay? And then, why do we do that? Okay, so we do that para mas simple yung solution. So, we want that a lot of forces will be parallel to the axis, x and y, so that we will not be solving a lot of components. So we'll not be dealing with a lot of angles. Kasi directly na yung summation of forces natin, naka-along x and y na sila. So hindi na natin masyadong problemahin yung mga components ng bawat forces. Okay? Ayun. Okay, ang pinaka-importante rin kasing isa is yung acceleration. Yun. At least wala tayong component ng acceleration if we will rotate axis. Particularly if we want to have it parallel dun sa x or y axis. Ayan. Now, if we want to draw the forces now dun sa FBD natin after we have rotated the axis, so parang pwede nyo rotate yung paper nyo para mas madali. Ayan. So we can see that normal is along the x-axis. And then friction is along the x-axis, which is to the right. Normal is upward. So normal is upward. Friction is to the right. And weight is on the third quadrant. And how will we transpose this angle? So dito. So dito ang 30 degrees. Okay, class. Ano major ninyo? Sorry, hindi ko alam. Ano ang major ninyo? Anyone? Why I ask because meron kinalaman sa gagawin ko. Hello, good morning. Hi, class. Anong major ninyo, class? Okay, so, yeah. Very good. Kasi sasabihin ko is for actually standard ng mga civil. Okay? Kaya that's what I asked. But you have you also have a choice naman kung hindi niyo susundan. Okay. Pag na-drawing na kasi natin ito, at meron tayong mga components na hindi nakaparallel sa X or Y, so kailangan natin yung components nila, forces. So, weight yan. So, meron tayong weight X at meron din tayong weight Y. Okay. Ang standard ng, if I'm not mistaken, ang natatandaan kong narinig ko before, na pag sa civil daw, ang ginagawa sa civil ay lagi yung angle nakadikit sa x-axis. Okay. So yung angle na ginagamit nila ay laging nasa x-axis. Kung nandito tayo at nandito sa y, yung 30 degrees na nakadikit, so ang gagamitin nila is ito. Ayan. So since ito tsaka ito ay complementary, so therefore, ito ay 60 degrees. Kukunin nila yung 60 degrees. Hindi magsusulat. So, kukunin nila yung 60 degrees. Question ay bakit? Okay? Bakit? Kasi para maging consistent sila na pag cosine yan, laging, pag x yan, it's always cosine. Pag y yan, it's always sine. Di ba pag sa sine, di ba SOHCAHTOA? Pag sine, it's opposite. So, opposite. So, therefore, halimbawa, y yan, WY, at hindi ko consider yung 30, opposite siya ng 60. Kasi malayo siya sa kanya, hindi nakadikit yung angle sa kanya. At pag cosine naman, is x, laging cosine. Kasi nakadikit siya, di ba, adjacent. Adjacent siya, nakadikit siya sa kanya, 60. Kaya cosine yung x. So, yung ginagawa nila. Na ang WX ay equal siya sa either W cosine 60 or W sine 60. Ayan. So it's up to you on which one you'll be wanting to use. Okay? Ako kahit alin naman, lagi ko naman kasing chine-check yung mga angles ko, kaya medyo nasanay na. Pero, ayan, para nagiging standard sila, yung mga angle ay dinidikit lagi sa x-axis. Para constant or consistent na pag x is cosine, pag y sine. Okay? Those two are only applicable if and only if the angle is along the x-axis. Okay? Or else magbabaliktad sila. Okay, now let's continue. So therefore, ayan. Okay, next. Since meron tayong frictional force, kagaya ng sabi ko kanina, unahin natin siya sa y. So summation of forces along y is equal to MA. I forgot. So I forgot A. So A is in the, ayan, down the incline. It should be negative because it's going to the left. So that is our assumption. Okay, pataas ay positive pag sa summation of forces along y. So that's equal to MAY. Ayan. Okay, so what are the forces along y? So we only have, so we focus on y, yung y. So we'll have normal minus WY. So that's equal to, but AY is 0 because it is only accelerating along the X, so no acceleration along Y. So that will be equal to 0. So N is equal to WY. So that's equal to W. Ang gagamitin ko? So gagamitin ko na lang yung cosine 30. So normal is equal to, ano ba yung mass natin? 3 times 9.8 times cosine 30. So normal force is 25.46 newtons. 25.46. Okay. Okay, now let's proceed to y. Okay, so the summation of forces along y, x na pala, x is equal to MAX pakanan ay positive. Now, let's go to the figure. So, ano yung nasa X? So, we only have the frictional force minus WX is equal to M times negative A. Okay? M times negative A. Okay, so what's our frictional force? That's a mu N minus W sine 30 is equal to negative 3A. Oh, yeah. So, mu is a 0.1. Ay, wala. Di pala siya given. Hinahanap siya. So, that's mu times N. That's a 25.46 minus 3 times 9.8 times sine 30 is equal to negative 3A. Okay, so let's simplify. So 25.46 mu minus 14.7 is equal to negative 3A. Ayan. Okay? Kaya lang class, hindi natin makuha. Ano ba yung mu natin at sa acceleration? So given sila. So we cannot directly get the answers from this equation. Now let's go back to the given. Ayan. So we're given that it started at rest. Ayan. And then meron siyang displacement and time. So that means we can compute for acceleration using kinematics. So letter A, so we're given that initial velocity is 0 because it started at rest. The displacement is 2 meters. And then the time is 1.5 seconds. So we can find acceleration. So we'll be using delta x using kinematic equation is equal to VIT plus 1/2 AT squared. But this is equal to 0. So therefore, we have 2 is equal to 1/2 A times 1.5 squared. So acceleration is 4 over 1.5 squared. So the acceleration is a 1.78 meters per second squared. A 1.78 meters per second squared. So that's for letter A. So letter A, we got it. Okay, my question? Okay, so letter B, what is the coefficient of friction? So therefore, sa B, we'll apply acceleration in this equation. So we'll have 25.46 mu minus 14.7 is equal to negative 3 times 1.78. Ayan. So transpose natin ito and then add natin. So this is 25.46 mu is equal to 20.03. Then divided by 25 point. Parang mali. Oh. Exam just 9.37. It's 9.37 divided by 25.46. So the coefficient of friction is 0.37. Okay, the coefficient of friction is 0.37. Okay, for letter C, what is the frictional force? So F is equal to mu N. So that's a 0.37 times 25.46. So the frictional force is 9.37. Yun pala. Ayun na pala. And then yung letter D, Okay, so what is the speed of the block after it has slid 2 meters? So what is the final velocity? So given this also, so we'll have V final is V initial plus 80. So cancel this is 0. So that's equal to 1.78 times 1.5. So V final is 2.67. 2.67 meters per second. Ayan. So those are our answers. So any question? Okay, wala. So let's proceed to our next example. Wala kayong question. Are you sure you don't have any question? Okay, let's hear. Okay, so we're given two blocks which are connected by a rope of negligible mass and are being dragged by horizontal force. So suppose that the force is 68 newtons and given the mass one is 12 kilograms and then mass two is 8 kilograms. And the coefficient of friction between each block and the surface is zero point 0.1. Determine the acceleration of the system and the tension T in the rope. Ayan. Okay. So, same lang din naman ang approach. Okay? FBD. And then, so bago natin kunin yan, we need to identify all the forces acting on the object. So, what are the forces acting on the object? So, we have, let's say for mass 1, so the weight 1. And then since it's on the surface, so we have a normal force. Let's call that normal 1. And then we have the tension. So tension is always away from the object. So that's a tension. And I forgot if the 468 newtons is dragging M2 to the right. So what will be the acceleration? So what's the direction of the acceleration? So since this is moving to the right, so acceleration will be in this direction as well. Okay, if that is the direction of the motion, so therefore, what will be the direction of the frictional force acting on M1? Okay, remember, friction is always opposite the motion. If the motion of M1 is to the right, so frictional force for M1 should be to the left. Okay, so any other forces acting on M1? I don't think meron pa. So wala na. So let's go to M2. So M2, what are the forces acting on M2? So we have the weight. Since it's also on the surface, we have normal 2. And then we have the applied force, F, and also the tension, D. Yeah. So which is away from the object. And then, so since the object is also moving to the right, and there's a friction between the surface and the object, so frictional force should also be in this direction, which is also opposite the motion. So it should be to the left. Ayan. So wala na. Okay, now let's draw the FPD. So yung first object muna. So M1. So the forces are, we have the tension to the right, normal upward, weight downward, and then yung frictional force to the left. Ayan. And then acceleration is in this direction. Again, do we have a frictional force? Yes, so that means we need the normal force. So, unahin na natin yung normal force. So, lagi natin unahin yon kung meron tayong frictional force, lalo na kung coefficient yung given. So, let's have the summation of forces along y is equal to MAY. Pataas ay positive. But MAY is 0. So, therefore, summation of forces along y is 0. Because the object M1 will only accelerate along the x-axis, not along y. So therefore, acceleration along y is 0. So we have N1 minus weight 1 is equal to 0. So N1 is equal to weight 1, which is equal to 12 times 9.8 times, yun lang. Yun lang pala. So that will be 12 times 9.8. So 117.6 newtons. Ayan. Okay. Okay, after getting normal, so let's proceed to x. So let's have the summation of forces along x is equal to MAX. So pagkanan will be positive. So focus on the forces along x. So we only have the tension and then the frictional force. So that's equal to M times the positive A. Ayan. So tension minus mu n is equal to 18 A. Ay, sorry, 12 pala, 12. Saan ba ako? M1, so 12. 12A. So, therefore, we'll have tension minus, what's our coefficient of friction? It's 0.1 times 117.6 is equal to 12A. So, let's simplify. So, tension minus 11.76 is equal to 12a. So let this be our first equation. Ayan. First equation. Now let's go to summation of forces. Hindi pala. So second mass na pala tayo. Now let's proceed to our second object. So we're done with the first object. So let's proceed to the second object. Let's draw the forces acting on the object M2. So we have the force, applied force. So the applied force is 68 newtons. We have the normal upward, the weight downward, tension to the left, and then frictional force also to the left. Ayan. And acceleration is in this direction. So that's also positive. Ayan. Again, we have frictional force. So therefore, we'll start with Y. So summation of forces along Y is equal to MAY. Up, going up is positive. But again, acceleration is only due X. So therefore, this is 0. So what are the forces along Y? We have N2 minus W2 is equal to 0. So normal is equal to weight 2. And that is 18 times 9.8. So the normal force is 176.4 newtons. Okay, so next, so let's proceed to X. So summation of forces along X is equal to MAX. To the right is positive. So what are the forces along X? So we have the applied force minus the tension minus the frictional force 2. So that's equal to M2 times positive A. So this is equal to 68 minus the tension minus mu n is equal to M2A. So this is 68 minus tension minus 0.1 times 176.4 is equal to 18A. So this is, can we simplify? So the 68 minus 0.1 times 176.4. 50.36. So that's a 50.36 minus T is equal to 18A. So this is our second equation. Okay, now let's solve simultaneously equation 1 and equation 2. So let me just put it that here. That's negative 11.76 plus T is equal to 12A. Let's just add to cancel this. So we'll have a 38.6. So 38.6 is equal to 30A. So divide this by 30. So acceleration is 1.29 meters per second squared. Ayan. So that's the acceleration of the objects. Since they are connected by a rope, so therefore they will have the same acceleration. Okay, and then at equation 1, to get our tension. So tension minus 11.76 is equal to 12 times 1.29. Okay, the tension is equal to 27.2 newtons. So this is the answer. So these are the answers, the acceleration and then the tension. Okay, any question on the example? Okay, wala. Okay, let's proceed to our next example. Ayan. Hindi ko talaga maayos yung ating banner. Try yung question talaga. Okay. Two blocks are connected by a cord passing over a small frictionless pulley rest on frictionless planes. So we are given two blocks. So one is 100 kilograms, which lies on a plane with an angle of 30 degrees. On the other hand, so we have the 50-kilogram block, which is lying on another plane, a frictionless then, with an angle of 53.1 degrees. First question, which way will the system move when the blocks are released from rest? And what is the acceleration of the blocks? And C, what is the tension in the cord? Okay, last. So pag meron tayong ganito na example, so we need to um, assume, okay? Kayo ang magsasabi or mag-a-assume ng mga yung direction because it is wala naman applied for, so therefore we cannot tell initially kung saan pupunta yung mga blocks natin. So ang gagawin ninyo ay mag-a-assume kayo but be very consistent in assuming. Hindi po pwede na halimbawa yung 100 kilograms sabi nyo bababa, ito din bababa. So hindi siya nagiging consistent. So kung ang 100 ay bababa, dapat yung 50 tataas or vice versa. Kung sa tingin ninyo yung 50 yung bababa, tataas naman yung 100. So maging consistent lang doon sa direction. Okay, or doon sa assumption. Okay? So in this example, I will let you decide. So sa tingin ninyo, alin ang saan mag-move yung objects natin? Sino ang bababa? Or anong object yung bababa? Okay, class, kung ang sagot ninyo, ang naging sagot ninyo ay negative, hindi ibig sabihin nun na mali yung sagot ninyo. It just so happened that your assumption is in the opposite direction. So, ang gagawin nyo lang nun, is i-correct nyo yung sagot ninyo. Pero, hindi ibig sabihin nun na mali kayo. Okay? Ayan. So, I will let you decide. So, kayo pumili. Alin ang bababa? Yung 100 or yung 50? Anyone can answer. Para lang meron tayong susundan na assumption. Kayo yung pag-a-assume ko ng direction. So, anyone? Anyone can type or tell me which do you think will slide down the inclined plane? Is it the 100 or the 50? Yes. Ayun, meron na nagsabi. So, may nag-assume, sabi sa akin ay 100 daw. So, let's do that assumption. Jason? How about you, Jason? Same? 100? This one, what happened? 100 din. Sige, 100. So, we'll follow that. So, ang assumption na gagawin natin is bababa yung 100. So, dito yung direction ng acceleration ng 100. And that means, kung ito yung direction ng 100, syempre, tataas yung 50. So, dito naman na magiging direction ng 50. Hindi pwedeng pababa. So, hindi ka magiging consistent nun pag bumaba sila pareho or tumaas silang pareho. So, kailangan maging consistent ka doon sa assumption. Just follow what you think the motion of the object will be. Okay? Same lang din ang gagawin natin. So, ang gagawin natin ay mag-identify din ng forces acting on each object, and then we'll draw the FBD, and then we'll solve. Okay, so whatever we can solve. So let's start with this. Let's call this mass 1. Kumare, ito yung mass 1. Ito yung mass 2. Ayan. So what are the forces acting on it? So we have weight 1. We have the normal 1. And then, since meron tayong tali dito, so we have the tension. So we have the tension. Okay, next. Dito naman ay, so we have the weight. Weight again is always downward. So normal is perpendicular to the surface. And then tension is away from the object. So this is the tension. Ayan. Okay. So after that, meron pa bang forces acting on it? So I don't think meron pa. So let's start with the drawing the FBD. So for the M1, okay, so what are the forces? Now class, this time, again, we have an inclined plane and an angle. So that means we need to rotate axis. So ang gagawin natin is, ganyan. So we assume that the x-axis is always parallel to the surface. Yes. Kung ito yung x-axis para sa mass 1, ito naman yung din kanyang y-axis. Okay, para makita natin yung acceleration din and then yung mga forces na parallel sila doon sa dalawang axis. So we have tension in this direction. The normal 1. And then yung weight natin is on the third quadrant. So nandito yung weight. And then yung angle ay nandito din. So 30 degrees. Ayan. So we'll start with the M1 first. Ayan. So don't forget the acceleration is in this direction. So therefore it's negative A. And then the components of our weight. So we have weight 1x and then we have weight 1y. 1x and weight 1. Okay. So first question, do we have friction in the system? So nakasulat naman dyan, frictionless plane. So that means we don't have any interest in the normal force. So we can skip yung normal. So don't get normal anymore because we don't need it. Kasi wala namang friction na involved. Kung merong friction, una nyo siyang kukunin. Eh, kung wala namang friction, huwag nyo na siyang kukunin. Kasi hindi naman natin sa gagamitin. Okay, so that means we'll proceed to X kasi ako doon lang meron tayong acceleration. So the summation of forces along X is equal to MAX. Pakanan ay positive. So focus on the forces along X. We have tension minus weight 1X. That's equal to M1 times negative A. Negative A because our acceleration is going to the left, where in our assumption, anything to the right will be positive. Ay. So that will be tension minus weight 1 sine 30 is equal to negative, what's our mass? 100 A. Ayan. So tension minus 100 times 9.8 times sine 30 is equal to negative 100 A. So tension minus 4, 490. Tama ba ang computation ko, class? Pwede pa compute? Baka mali na, mali na, baka mali na naman ako. Tama ba ang computation ko? Okay, so it's 490. Okay, so thank you. So let this be our first equation. Okay. Proceed to our next. Okay, so we have mass 2. Ayan. Okay, mass 2. So we'll also need to rotate axis. So let this be our X and then this will be Y. Ayan. Okay, so we can see normal is upward. Tension is to the left. Then acceleration is also to the left. And then weight is on the fourth quadrant. So nandito yung ating weight. And yung 51 o 53.1 degrees is dito. Ayan. Okay. And do not forget the components of weight 2. Weight 2x and then yung weight 2y. Okay. Okay. Same is true with okay, same is true with earlier. Since we do not have any frictional force, so we don't need to get the normal force. Normal 2 pala to. So that means we'll proceed directly to along x. So summation of forces along x is equal to MAX. So pakanan ay positive. So we have W2x minus tension is equal to M2 times negative A. Ayan. So this is W2 sine 53.1 minus t is equal to negative 50a. So this is 50 times 9.8 sine 53.1 minus t is negative 58. So what is that one? So that is 50 times 9.8 times sine 53.1. 391.85 minus t is equal to negative 58. So this is our second equation. So tama ba yung ating equation? Okay, so if that is our second equation, so let's equate that to our first equation. So this is our first equation, so ipapantay ko na lang. So we'll have positive t, negative 49 is equal to negative 108. Ayan. So let's just add. So cancel yung tension. So we'll have minus 490. It's negative 98.15 is equal to negative 158. So divide this by negative 98.15. So therefore, acceleration is tama ba ako? Negative 1.53. The positive meters per second squared. Kaya mag-equation ako. Para lang makasigurado. Sabi ko na may mali. So this should be this should be 150. Ayan. So A, nakalimutan ko yung reciprocal. Mali. So A is 0.65 meters per second squared. Ayan. Tama na, Jervin. Okay. Ba't yung dinivide ko? It's 0.65. Okay naman sinulat ko. And 150. So it's 0.65. Ayan. So the acceleration is, tama ba, positive? Okay, so kung positive yung acceleration, so we can answer now letter A. So question is, which way will the system move when the blocks are released from rest? So the answers are 100 down the incline and then 50 up the incline. Ayan. 100 down 50 up because we have the answer na positive. So that means the assumption is correct. Okay. Letter B. What is the acceleration? So we have it. It's 0.65. And then letter C. What is the tension in the cord? So what is the tension? So let's just use equation 1. So on equation 1, so we'll have ano ba yun? T minus 490 is equal to negative 100 times 0.65. So what's the tension? Excuse me. So that's 425 newtons. Tama ba? 425 newtons. Okay, so any question on this example? Okay, kung wala na, ayan. So that's it for today.